Good morning and welcome. Last time we were together, I was here and we were going through the marking guidelines of grade 12 paper 1, and here we are today. And the focus today is going to be on memo discussion for paper 2. And I'm sure by now you should be knowing me, but for the purpose of those who will be seeing me for the first time, my name is Medupi Mui from head office, responsible for business studies. All right, without any waste of time, there is one or two things that I've got to clarify before we can carry on with our memo discussion. First of all, is that the paper 2 that was written last week was 2020 November paper 2. We received quite a number of calls from schools inquiring if that was the correct paper. I must make it clear to you that it was the correct paper. This November 2020 paper, it was a paper that was supposed to have been written last year, but it was not written. Instead, a backup paper was used. So this paper, nationally, it was decided that it should be used for trial examination. So this paper was common to all the provinces. What does that mean? It means all the provinces in the country, they wrote the same paper. And secondly, what I want you to take note of, because this was the 2020 November paper, when, as a teacher now, you now give feedback and you go through this paper with your learners, it is important to take into account two important documents. Remember, I said it was last year's paper, 2020 November paper, and a lot has happened since that time till now. Now, it's important to take note of the following documents. The 2021 exam guideline document. Please take into account that document. Why? Because there are changes that were effected from January 2021, and those changes, they are there in the examination guideline. Now, if you can simply take this paper and you go through it without it taking into account the examination guideline, it will also not assist you, because remember, we are in the 2021 calendar year. So whatever we are doing, we must do it in context of what should be happening in the current year. So the 2021 examination guideline is important so that your learners, they are still in line with what they will be assessed on November this year. And then second document that is important, that you must take into account when you now go back and you go through this marking guideline with your learners, is the amendments to the notes. We know that all schools have been provided with the notes, and there are amendments on the notes, and those amendments, it's important, those are amendments for 2021. So if you take into account the amendments and you take into account the examination guideline, that will help you give proper feedback to your learners, so that when they finally prepare themselves for the end of the year examination, they are in line as to how they are going to be assessed, and they will be ready, more than ready, for the end of the year examination. And as we go through the marking guideline, you'll now begin to understand why I said it's important to take into account those two important documents. All right. Like we did previously, I said before you can go through the paper as a teacher now, start marking the paper, it's important to go through the notes to markers. And you can only do that if you've got the question paper and the memo with you, or the marking guidelines with you. I'm not going to go through all the notes, but I will sort of make an emphasis on few notes that are so crucial, and just to remind you, because you may take it for granted that we've gone through the notes previously, and that it's not important to go through the notes. It's important because the notes, they keep you in line as to how you should go about marking. Note number 1, it is important that at school level, the teacher makes use of a red pen and the departmental head makes use of a green pen. And then other pens like your pink pen, your orange pen, your turquoise pen, all of those pens are the people who will be visiting your schools, and those would be your your external visitors who would be going through what your learners might have gone through. So it's important for you to take note that at school level, we are expecting only 2 pens, the red pen and the green pen. The red pen being for the marker and the green pen being for the departmental head. And then your subject advisors, when they come, they'll use preferably a pink pen, and then you'll have other officials, either from the province or even from nationally, they will use whatever pen, but at school level, strictly it's red and green. And then number 2, candidates' responses must be in full sentences for section B and C. However, this would depend on the nature of the question. We said this previously, and we are still emphasizing that. And it is important on this note to sensitize your learners that to write in full sentences, there are huge advantages to that, because when they write in full sentences, they tend to benefit full 2 marks instead of one mark, or even forfeiting marks if they don't write in full sentences and prefer to write in phrases. But that would also depend on the nature of the question. But it's important that candidates and learners, they write in full sentences, especially in section B and section C. And it also says to you, if at school level you've got additional resources like your study guides that you give to learners. You know, study guides, remember, they give responses in a summarized format. And you find that when you use a study guide does not go full in detail. It gives a summary, and study guide is actually meant for revision purposes, just to remind learners of what they should know. And it can also help those learners who are sort of struggling with the subject, and the study guide can make it easier for them to remember and simply to give responses. But remember, we have given you notes, and when you look at the notes are in full sentences. That's why we are encouraging you to make use of the notes that we have provided. If you use study guides, you must make an emphasis to your learners that even though responses are from a study guide, but if responses are not in full, even though they are from a study guide, the chances of learners forfeiting marks is very, very high. So we are not saying they shouldn't use study guides, but we are saying they must use it having that at the back of their mind, that the notes is the preferred resources that we are encouraging you to use. Study guides, you can use it just to remember and to finally prepare yourself, but the responses that we are looking for you to respond accordingly to this note of writing in full sentences, the notes that have been provided to you would definitely assist. And number 3, it's also very, very important to note that a comprehensive marking guideline, this is a comprehensive marking guideline, but it is by no means exhaustive. And due consideration should be given for answers that use different expression from what it appears in the marking guideline, or a response that comes from another credible source, or a response that is original, or a response that is using a different approach. So as a teacher, with your full knowledge of your content, you should be able to implement this note appropriately, because you would know that if this is a response but it has been put differently, the learner should still be awarded marks as accordingly. And then that note again, it is followed by a boldly written note saying there is only one correct answer in section A. It is important to note that. You cannot have more than one answer in section A. It's one answer, one correct answer in section A. I will just scroll through the notes that we've gone through the notes. By now you know how to circle marks, how to do subtotals and so on. I will just go straight to the notes that I feel they need a little bit of emphasis. Note number 10, for example, there no additional credit must be given for repetition of facts indicated with an R. It is important because if you are a teacher and you do not pay attention to the responses given to you by your learners, a learner can give you one response. However, having put it differently more than once or thrice, and if you are not careful, you end up giving or awarding marks unnecessarily, only to find that that has, it's a fact that is still meaning the same thing, and it is therefore a repeated fact. So no additional credit must be given for repetition of facts. It's important to take note of that. We went through this one of evaluate and critically evaluate, and I said you'll always have this note on the marking guideline, even though currently in our text, our examination, or even in our subject, we are not using this this verb critically evaluate when questions are being asked. But that has been left in our marking guideline because our subject is evolving, and who knows, this critically evaluate is likely to come back later. So when it comes back, you already know how that should be interpreted in a question. I will not go through that. And the same applies for analyze. The very important note that I want to take you through again is this one on note number 12 on the allocation of marks. It says the allocation of marks must be informed by the nature of the question, cognitive verb used, mark allocation in the marking guideline, and the context of each question. Now let's look at the verbs. Now note number 12.1 and 12.2, very, very important and critical. 12.1, it says cognitive verbs such as advise, name, state, outline, motivate, recommend, suggest. The list is not exhaustive, do not usually require much depth in candidates' responses. Therefore, the mark allocation for each statement or answer appears at the end. So you'll see, what does that mean? It means you must also sensitize your learners now that when they come across a question saying name or state or recommend, how they are going to be marked. The ticks will appear at the end of their responses because of the verbs. Because the verbs, the significance of the verbs is that they do not usually require much depth in their responses. And however, when you go to 12.2, that's where we have what we call split marking. Verbs such as define, describe, explain, discuss, elaborate, distinguish, differentiate, compare, tabulate, analyze, evaluate, even critically evaluate is being included there. Like I've already explained, make an explanation to that effect, that critically evaluate, you won't find it in the question paper, but it's likely to come back later. All of those verbs, they require a greater depth of understanding, application, and reasoning. Therefore, the marks will be allocated more objectively to ensure that assessing is conducted according to established norms so that uniformity, consistency, and fairness are achieved. 12.1, it means where you see these verbs, you must definitely know that you are going to have split marking in the marking guideline. 12.1, when you see those verbs, there is no split marking. The ticks come at the end of the responses. But with 12.2, the ticks will go straight to the fact, where the fact is, and it's a split marking. Ticks have been split there. It is important to take note of that. Very important note, note number 12. And then number 14, by now you know that note. 14.2, if two facts are written in one sentence, award the candidate full credit. 14.1 above still applies. So that is straightforward, that one. 14.4, it's important. We talked about it previously. Use of cognitive verbs and allocation of marks. 14.4.1. If the number of facts are specified, questions that require candidates to describe, discuss, explain. Now, the key thing there is that if the number of facts are specified, and that number of facts is specified and the candidates are requested to describe as a verb, to discuss or to explain, the marking will be as follows. It will be 2 marks for the facts and 1 mark for the explanation, even in section C. The fact and explanation are given separately in the marking guideline to facilitate mark allocation. So even when you go through the marking guideline, you must see whether this note has been fully implemented in the marking guideline. And these are the tips that you must always give your learners. And what does that mean? It's a benefit to the learner. If the learner knows that, okay, if I come across a question like this, and the number of facts have been specified and the verb is either describe or discuss or explain, by just giving the fact, I'm getting 2 marks, and for the explanation 1 mark. Learners are likely to score more marks there because of how the questions are going to be marked. So this note is very, very important. Just discuss that with your learners and tip them, give them tips in as far as that is concerned. And then section C, we know section C by now, 15.1, that all our essays, they're out of 40, but the content, normally, the content, the marks for the content, they add up to 50, but they get reduced to a maximum of 32. Then we add the 8 marks for insight, and we arrive at a total of 40. So it's 32 plus 8, and then total 40. That's a summary of how essays in business studies are being marked. You should be knowing that by now. Let's go to the insight now. It's also important, especially for those who, who are still learning how to mark the essay, or those who are still new in the subject. It's important to stress the marking of an essay and how the marks for insight should be awarded and also indicated on the scripts. Now, marks for insight, we all know that marks for insight, we are talking about what we normally call LASSO. It's an acronym. And L, it stands for layout. A, it stands for analysis and interpretation. S for synthesis, and then O for originality. We normally call it LASSO. Your learners should be knowing that by now. And it's important to also sensitize your learners, show them how they are going to be marked, give them tips on how to benefit from these marks for insight, so that they stand a chance to get marks. When they get marked in an essay. For example, layout. Is there an introduction? a body and conclusion. If the answer is yes, the learner will get 2 marks. 1 mark is for introduction. If the learner has literally written introduction and there's an explanation of the introduction underneath there, the learner will get 1 L. And where do you indicate that? You indicate that on the left-hand margin next to the title introduction. And then conclusion, the learner will get another L. That L is another mark. So the learner will get 2 marks for only the layout, for introduction and also for conclusion. And it is important to give tips to your learners that if they do that, they stand a chance to make more marks, because it's just 2 marks there for layout. And then analysis and interpretation, it's also 2 marks. How do you allocate the 2 marks? The first A, we call it, we give it A, capital A. It's the first one, or it's 1 mark for the first A. It's when the learner has addressed all the headings. What do we mean by all the headings? It means in an essay, remember in an essay, you've got your preamble, that information in a box, and then you have what we call the instructions. Maybe we can just go straight to one of the essay and see. Look at this essay. Question number 5. What you see in the box there is what we call a preamble. A preamble, it guides learners as to what is the essay going to be all about. And when you look at the preamble is not a scenario or a case study. You see, it's a guide. Successful leaders know that a positive attitude enables them to achieve business goals. The situational leadership theory guides business on managing people. Some leaders believe in effectiveness of the charismatic and transactional leadership style, while others prefer the autocratic leadership style. So it's a preamble, and from that preamble, you can sense that questions are going to come from that. The preamble, it guides, it gives you a clue as to what the question will be all about. Write an essay on leadership in which you address the following aspects. Now look, we've got 4 bullets there. Bullet number 1 is on outlining the role of personal attitude in successful leadership. Second bullet, explanation of the situational leadership theory. And you can see all of that is bulleted there. You can link it with what is there in the preamble. Number 3, discuss the impact of the following leadership styles on businesses: charismatic and transactional. And lastly, suggest situations in which autocratic leadership style could be applied in the workplace. So you can see all the 4 bullets, they give you instructions. These are the questions. This is what the essay should be based on. Now, for analysis and interpretation, if the learner has addressed all the 4 bullets, for example, there's a paragraph on personal attitude, there is also a paragraph on situational leadership theory, there's also a paragraph on the impact of charismatic and transactional, and there's also a paragraph on situations in which autocratic leadership style could be applied. The learner will get the first A, 1 for that analysis. It is clear that this learner can analyze the question properly. And then the second A is for interpretation. It says there, if the learner gets 16 to a maximum of 32, the learner will get the other A. And where do we put these A's? We put them on the left-hand margin. The first A, you put it on the last heading, the last heading. The last heading there, it's, according to this question, it is on situations in which autocratic leadership style could be applied. You put the first A, and then if the learner, when you add the marks of the learner, the learner gets 16 and above, you put the second A, you put it just before the conclusion. Now we know that, oh, this learner has scored 2 marks for analysis and interpretation. The first one was for addressing the headings, all the headings. The second one was for scoring 16 and above. If the learner does not do that, the learner will definitely forfeit marks. And then synthesis. With synthesis, it's about relevancy. Whether whatever the learner has put there is relevant. And we use what we normally call negative marking. We presume that all the learner is presenting in an essay is relevant. Now, every time the learner brings something irrelevant, the learner will forfeit marks, and we will indicate that by writing -S. -S, it means something that has been put there is irrelevant. And when you talk of irrelevancy, we are not referring to a sentence or a statement, but we are referring to a whole paragraph that is not relevant. That's where the learner will score, will get -S for that. Let me cite an example. When you look at bullet number 3, was saying, discuss the impact of the following leadership style on businesses: charismatic and transactional. Now, if the learner, instead of discussing charismatic and transactional, the impact, the learner decides to discuss the impact of democratic leadership style and autocratic leadership style, you can sense that that is a question that was not asked. And because that was not asked, and we are talking about the paragraph based on the impact, that learner will get -S because the learner has brought what was irrelevant to what has been asked. I hope that clarifies that. But however, when we talk of relevancy, we do not necessarily mean that wrong facts are also irrelevant. The learner can still be relevant, but having provided wrong facts. So just differentiate between the two. So you've got option 1, option 2, and option 3. First option, if the candidate answers 50% or more of the question with only relevant facts, you don't write any -S. There won't be any -S on the left-hand margin, and the learner will get 2 marks. What does that mean? It means the learner has addressed 50% and above. This 50%, we are referring to 50% of the instructions that have been given to the learner. When we go to, for example, this question 5, you've got 2 bullets there. 4 bullets there. The role of personal attitude and situational leadership theory, and the impact of the leadership styles and situations in which autocratic leadership style could be applied. If the learner has only discussed the role of personal attitude and the situational leadership theory, the learner has addressed 50% because it is 2 out of 4 bullets. You've got 4. That's what we mean by 50%. If the learner has addressed only 1, for example, the whole of the essay, the learner only talked about the role of personal attitude, or only situations in which autocratic leadership style can be applied, or maybe only the impact, or only the situational leadership theory, then the learner has addressed less than 50%. But if the learner has addressed 2 or more, the learner will get synthesis for that. And if the information provided is relevant, there is nothing irrelevant, the learner will get 2 marks for that, and you won't write any -S. I hope that is very, very clear, because teachers tend to confuse this with analysis and interpretation, that one of 16 and above. There's a difference between the two. Here we are talking about 50% of the questions that have been posed to the learners. And these questions, we are referring to the 4 bullets, and 50% of 4 is 2 and above. I hope that it is clear. All right? That was the first option. The second option, where candidate answers less than 50%, is the one that I've just talked about. And some facts are relevant, some are relevant. The learner will get -1. You indicate that -1 next to the paragraph that is irrelevant, and the learner will get 1 mark instead of 2 for synthesis. And then the last option is option 3, where candidates answers less than 50% of the questions, and whatever the learner has presented, it's also irrelevant. No relevant facts there. And then the learner, you will write 2 minus S's on the left-hand margin, and the learner will get 0 for synthesis. So it's important. That's why I said negative marking, because if you don't show anything in the form of -S on the essay of the learner, it means that learner has got 2 marks for synthesis. But every time the learner brings something irrelevant and you indicate by -S, then it will be it will be 1 synthesis, 1 for synthesis, and if you've got 2, it will be 0 for synthesis. And you also indicate that on the left-hand margin. I hope that is important and that is also clarified. And the last aspect there of, or component of LASSO there, is originality. Originality, it has got to do with relevant examples based on what the question has been posed. And those examples, when you come up with it, we are not referring to textbooks examples. We are referring to examples that show that candidates and learners, they go an extra mile. You see, this originality is not easy for learners to get originality, because, when you look at layout, it's easy for them to get the 2 marks. When you go to analysis and interpretation, it's easy. Synthesis, they get 2 marks very easily. Originality, they must really work hard for it. But it does not mean there are no learners who get 2 marks for originality, but it should be those extraordinary learners who are bringing examples that are relevant based on the questions and showing that they also follow what is actually currently happening. They watch the news, they read the newspapers, and they link that with the content based on the question that has been asked. That will also be indicated on the left-hand margin with an O. And here we are referring to 1 O on 1 paragraph, and then the other paragraph, another O. It will be 2 O's, and that will give you 2 marks for originality. And the learner will get 8 marks for insight. And then you add it with facts for 32, you arrive at 40 marks for an essay. And I hope that has clarified whatever concerns you might be having when it comes to the marking of an essay and the allocation of marks for insight. And then there you've got a note there: no marks will be awarded for contents repeated from introduction and conclusion. I've said that before. The candidates forfeit marks for layout if the words introduction and conclusion are not stated. Very, very important. And lastly, no marks will be awarded for layout if the headings introduction and conclusion are not supported by an explanation. You must advise your learners on all of this, then it becomes easy for them to grab those marks for insight, and indicate insight in the left-hand margin with a symbol LAS, -S, and or O. I've already said that. And then 15.6 at the end of each essay, indicate allocation of marks for fact and marks for fact and marks for insight as follows. You write capital F. F is for facts. Maximum is 32, and then you come with your acronym now. L, it will be 2 marks depending on how the learner has scored. A, it should be 2 marks. S, 2 marks. O, 2 marks. You add that, the maximum of 40 marks. So this is how you mark an essay. It should not be really a hassle or an issue, and that's a standard practice in as far as the marking of an essay is concerned in business studies. Okay, I think I've touched on a few very important notes, but that does not mean other notes are not important. As a marker, please go through the notes, all of the notes, but I was just emphasizing on very, very important notes, and I want us now to go straight to our question. Now, when you look at question 1, we've talked about question 1. Question 1, section A, there are no alternative answers. I'm not going to go through question 1. 1.1.1 is D. It ends there. There is no D or F or C or whatever. It's D. It's one correct answer. 1.1 maximum of 10, 1.2 maximum of 10, 1.3 maximum of 10, and total for section A is 30 marks. Let's now go straight to section B. Now, when you go to section B, answer any 2 questions in this section. Clearly indicate the question number for each question that you choose, and the answer to each question must start on a new page. I must say, when you look at this instruction, even at the margin center, we are not all that strict that learners should start each question on a new page, and we don't even penalize should they not follow this. But this is just a way to encourage them because it makes marking easier. So as a teacher at school, just encourage your learners to start new questions on a new page. It's just to make it easier for the marker, and it makes marking easier and simpler and faster. However, if the learner, after completing one question, starts the following question immediately underneath that one, you mark it. There is nothing wrong in that, but this note is simply encouraging learners to start new questions on a new page, and encourage your learners to do that. It makes marking easier. Now let's look at 2.1, business ventures. Remember, paper 2, the focus is on the 2 broad topics, business ventures and business roles. And here, question 2 is on business ventures. 2.1, this is an appetizer. It's an appetizer, straightforward kind of a question. Name 4 factors that should be considered when making an investment decision. You remember when I started with the marking guideline discussion, I said when you give feedback to your learners, it's important now to also take into account the 2021 examination guideline, because this was the 2020 November paper, and there are developments since then up to now. When you look at this, when you go straight to your examination guideline, you'll realize that there are factors that are no longer included in the 2021 examination guideline, but they are there in the marking guideline because this was the 2020 paper. So when you give feedback, clarify that, because should your learners give those responses now at the end of the year, they would not have followed the 2021 examination guideline, and they will definitely forfeit marks for that. Let's look at the responses to that question. Question 2. Factors that should be considered when making an investment decision. You must go back to your examination guideline, 2021 guideline, and that will definitely give you those factors. Return on investment is 1 mark, risk 1 mark, investment period 1 mark, inflation rate 1 mark, personal budget 1 mark, liquidity 1 mark, tax implications or taxation 1 mark, investment planning 1 mark, and so on. Now, when you go to your 2021 examination guideline, you'll realize that, for example, a factor such as tax implications, investment planning, factors, fluctuations, track records, or history performance, they are not there in the examination guideline. So if the learner, should a question like this be asked in November, if a learner can provide those responses, that learner will be marked wrong. It will be penalized because that is not included in the 2021 examination guideline. I hope that clarifies a very important fact that you must take note of and you must also advise your learners on. But because this was based on last year's guideline, the memo takes into account all of those. And mark the first 4 because the question stated clearly that name 4. You mark the first 4 and the maximum marks there is 4 marks. I hope that is clearer to you. Let's go back to the question. Question 2.2. Outline the factors that should be considered when preparing a presentation. 6 marks. It's a very straight kind of a question. And when you look at this question, it says factors that should be considered when preparing. What does that mean? It means it is before the presentation. When you advise your learners, make it a point that they know that this happens before the presentation takes place. It is before, when preparing. Straightforward, and because of the verb outline, you remember what I said. It means you're going to have 2 ticks at the end of the response. Let's see if that is the case. There it is. Factors that should be considered when preparing for a presentation. For example, the first one, clear purpose, intentions, objectives, and aim and main points of the presentation is 2 marks and is 2 ticks at the end because of the verb outline. Main aims captured in the introduction, opening statement of the presentation, 2 marks. Information presented should be relevant and accurate, 2 marks. Fully conversant with the content or objectives of the presentation, 2 marks. Background, diversity, size, pre-knowledge of the audience to determine the appropriate visual aids, 2 marks. Prepare a rough draft of the presentation with logical structure or format with an introduction, body, and conclusion, 2 marks. Now, can you see? The question stated clearly that outline factors. And when you look at these factors, they have been put in full sentences. You remember what I said, that encourage your learners to put responses in full sentences, especially in section B and section C, depending on the nature of the question. And that makes it easier for them to benefit and get full marks when they get marked. The conclusion must summarize the key facts and how it relates to the objectives, or shows that all aspects have been addressed, 2 marks. You can go through all the responses. I mean, there's more than enough responses that have been provided in the marking guideline. But like I said, the key fact there is that these are factors that should be considered before, because it is when preparing for a presentation. You know, the examiner will simply play around with the words during the presentation, before or when preparing. So just sensitize your learners so that the responses they give, they are in line with what has been asked. You mark up to a maximum of 6. Let's go back to the question paper. Let's look at 2.3 now. Read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Tomelo Traders, TT. Tomelo Traders is well known for selling quality products. Tomelo, the owner, insured his business property against fire and theft. He disclosed all relevant information which may affect the extent of the risk to the insurance company. That is a scenario. Now let's look at 2.3.1. It says, identify 2 principles of insurance applicable to TT. Motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. Use the table below as a guide. You see, a lot of questions will suggest to candidates that or learners that they must use the table as a guide. You know, the use of a table, it makes it easier for the marker. Encourage and advise your learners to follow this recommendation, because it makes things easier for the marker and the marking becomes simpler. And if the marking is simpler, it's easy to, to award marks and so on. However, if a learner does not present the answer in this manner, in a table, the learner will still be marked right. The learner will not be penalized, but encourage your learners so that marking is simplified. And when you look at this is sheer application. Let's look at the principles of insurance and the motivations. And then 2.3.2 is a follow-on. It says, advise the management of TT on the advantages of insurance for the business. Here now it's advantages of the insurance to the business. A very common kind of a question, and learners, I don't know, they normally do not do well in this. And I mean, when you look at this, it's a question that has been there for, I don't know, for how long. And you go to the guideline. The guideline also states that this is the content that should also be studied. So a question like this, it's likely to be there in the question paper, in the examination, and learners should prepare and they should know how to answer. Let's go to the marking guideline. There it is. Principles of insurance from the scenario. The first one is indemnification or indemnity is 2 marks. The motivation, Domelo, the owner, insured his business property against fire and theft. And if you have clearly explained to your learners that what indemnification means, that principle of a risk that may either happen or may not happen. I mean, when you look at fire, I mean, if you insure your property against fire, your property can be on fire, or it may not, or even theft may or may not. So there is that principle of indemnity that is applicable there. And the second one is utmost good faith. What is the motivation? He disclosed all relevant information which may affect the extent of the risk to the insurance company. It's 1 mark. So you've got a submax of 4 for the principles of insurance and a submax of 2 for the motivations. And the maximum is 6 because it's 4 plus 2. Look at the note. It says, mark the first 2 principles only, because the question stated clearly that identify 2 principles. Now, if a learner provides more than 2, you mark the first 2. And then award marks for the principles of insurance, even if the codes were incomplete. Now, if the learner comes with a principle, but the quotation is not complete, still award 2 marks for the principle. And then number 3, it says, do not award marks for the motivation if the principle of insurance were incorrectly identified. It's very, very important. I've seen teachers making mistakes of simply awarding marks. If a learner, for example, gives a motivation without a principle, you can't give a mark for that. Or if a learner, instead of giving indemnification or indemnity as a principle, let's say, for argument's sake, the learner has provided a different principle from that, and the motivation sounds like it's correct, you cannot award a mark for that. So just be careful. The principle should be there, and the motivation should link with the principle. If the motivation is there but the principle is incorrect, you cannot award a mark for that. Just be careful. It's very, very important. And then the follow-on question, which was on the advantages. Advantages of insurance for businesses. Like I said, it's a question that has been there for some time. And learners tend to forfeit marks here because they repeat one and the same fact over and over again. I'm wondering what makes it so difficult for learners, to get this content right. Advantages of insurance for businesses. For example, insurance, it transfers the risk from the business or the insured to an insurance company or the insurer. It's 2 marks. Transfer of risk from the business to the insurance or insurance company is 2 marks. Transfer of risk is subject to terms and conditions of the insurance contract is 2 marks. Insurance, it protects the business against theft or loss of stock and or damages caused by natural disasters such as floods, storm damage, and so on. Here, learners tend to do what? They break this into a lot of facts. For example, they will say it protects the business against storms and expect to get 2 marks. Protects the business against floods, and it's a repetition of one fact. Just be careful of that, because the third bullet there, it covers all of those risks, your floods, your storm damage, and so on. And the key fact there is protection against those, against theft or loss of stock or damages caused by natural disasters. Just be careful. TT or the business will be compensated for insurable losses, e.g. destruction of property through fire. So you can see here also, responses have been provided in full sentences. There comes that emphasis again that let learners provide responses in full sentences. Business assets, for example, vehicles, equipment, buildings, need to be insured against damage or theft. Businesses are protected against loss of earnings, for example, strikes by employees, which may result in losses worth millions. Insurance protects businesses against dishonest employees, 2 marks. Life insurance can be taken on the life of partners in a partnership to prevent unexpected loss of capital. So, and you also have got this content in the notes. Please mark accordingly, and whatever is not included here but it is there in the notes also award marks accordingly. You go through the responses and you mark up to a maximum of 6. Let's go back to the question. Look at question 2.4. Explain how management could contribute to the success and or failure of a partnership. 4 marks. Explain how. Now the key thing there is that you are going to look at the management part of things. How management there. And then management is a factor. And then you also look at what? The form of ownership identified in this question is what? It's partnership. So when you answer this question, you must be clear. Your responses should link with partnership and should link with that factor of management and how that can contribute to either success or failure of a business. And when you look at this question, it's been asked differently. But it's a question that is there on forms of ownership, and I'm also wondering how come learners are not doing well in this question. And I'm sure you can remember, if you've gone through 2020 paper last year, you'll see. Here I'm referring to the one that was written, that one that was a backup paper. This question, it appeared in section C. It was part of essays. Learners did not do well. They did not do well. It is important that you look at this content, you do proper justice to this in preparing learners towards the final end of the year examination. Let's look at the responses that were actually expected. Contribution of management to the success and or failure of partnership. Like I said, the key factor there is management. And when you treat this content, it's important that you advise your learners whatever points they put down. Those points should show how that can make this form of ownership succeed, or how this would make this form of ownership fail. Here we are talking about partnership. Now, look at the first bullet. It says partners are actively involved. This is a success factor. What makes this to succeed? It is because partners are actively involved in management. You see, it links with that factor, management. And may use the ideas of other partners is another point. You see, it drives a point home. Why should partnership succeed? It is because partners are actively involved in the management. Let's look at the failure on the other side. Decision making can be time consuming, as partners have to be in agreement. You see, this also still links with what? With management. Here are the partners in management. They want to take a decision, but because there has to be consultation and whatever of other partners, that is going to take time. And this is likely to do what? To make this form of ownership fail. So just be careful when you treat this content with your learners in class, and advise them, to be clear on whatever they put. And as soon as they can get that trick right, it becomes easier for them to answer this correctly and get marks accordingly. And they must always look at what the question has been asked, because the question can be asked based on a different form of ownership or a different factor, and so on. The second bullet there, it says not all partners need to be actively involved in management and would rather appoint competent managers. That can make this form of ownership succeed. On the other hand, some management tasks may be neglected, as one partner may leave it to the others to complete. You have those that are sort of leaving their responsibilities to others, and some may end up neglecting some management tasks. You see, the fact there, it still links with what has been asked, the management part of things. Let's go back to the success. Partners have access to expertise of other partners when difficult decisions have to be made. You can see that dependency of those who are better skilled or have the expertise, and this may make partnership succeed when it comes to this factor of management. On the other side, partners may disagree on how to run the business, which may lead to tensions between them. This may also do what? Contribute to the failure of this form of ownership. So it's important to do justice to this aspect, and the moment you get it right, I assure you, your learners will get this question very interesting, and they will definitely score marks, and it's always there. Let's go to the notes. I will not go through all the responses. Note number 1, the answers do not have to be in a tabular format. You see that this table, it makes it easier for marking to take place on the side of the teacher, but it's not a prerequisite that whatever learners present should be in a tabular format. So even if learners do not present that in a tabular format, they must still be awarded marks. And the success or failure factors must relate to partnership. You see, I emphasize the fact that the responses should link with the question, the form of ownership. And the other thing is that when you look at the responses, they also do not have to link, but the responses should be clear. And the other thing is that when you look at the question, it says success and or. It means some of the candidates may focus only on success factors, and they should still get their marks. Others may concentrate only on failure factors or all those issues that they feel will contribute to the failure of this form of ownership when it comes to management. They should also get their marks. Others may sort of, combine them, give success factors and also give failure factors, whichever way it happens, because the question or the marking guideline says success and or failure factors. It's important when you mark. Let's go to another question. Question 5, 2.5. Read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Consulting services, CS. Ayanda, the owner of consulting services, invested 8,000 rand at Wonder Bank for 3 years. The bank offered her an interest rate of 10% per annum. The interest is calculated on the original amount plus interest. Very interesting question. When you look at that question, you realize that this question has been asked slightly different and is very interesting, but still relevant to the content. 2.5.1, it says, identify the type of interest on which Ayanda's investment will be calculated. Motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. Very interesting. And then 2.5.2 is about calculation now, because it says calculate the amount of interest that Ayanda will receive after 3 years using the type of interest identified in question 2.5.1. Show all workings 5 marks. And you can see it's a follow-on question there. It links with whatever responses the learner might provide in 2.5.1. Let's go to the marking guideline. 2.5.1, the type of interest from the scenario there is compound interest. What is the motivation? The interest is calculated on the original amount plus interest. 1 mark. Note, award marks for the type of interest even if the code was incomplete or incorrect. And then do not award marks for the motivation if the type of interest was incorrectly identified. If, for example, in 2.5.1, the learner said simple interest, that would be wrong. And if the learner comes with this motivation, the interest is calculated on the original amount, that should be marked wrong because the type of interest identified was incorrect. So this note number 2 is important. Do not award marks for the motivation if the type of interest was incorrectly identified. And then let's come to the calculation. And remember, the question said calculate the amount of interest. The most important thing is what we are looking for is the interest. Look at option 1. Option 1 there is year 1, 8,000, because the principal amount there is 8,000. For 10 on 10%, you've got 800 rand. And then year 2, remember its interest on in its compound is now 8,000 plus 880. There it gives you the new principal of amount of 8,800. And then you go to year 3 and then look at the interest. The interest there, the correct answer there would be 2,648. That is the correct amount. That is the interest, because year 1 the interest was 800, year 2 the interest was 880, year 3 the interest was 968. That's the first option. Let's look at the second option. The second option, you have the formula there. You know the formula by now, and by simply stating the formula, the learner can get 1 mark for that. And then you simply substitute the amounts there in the formula, and that should give you your 10,648. And that 10,648 is not the interest, because remember what I said, the question wanted you to provide the interest. Now, to get the interest, the learner should subtract 8,000 from the 10,648 to come to the interest of 2,648. You get that? That is the correct answer. So it's the two options that the learner can use, and depending on what the learner provides to you, you have to mark accordingly. Now, notes are important. Number one, award full 5 marks, because the question is allocated 5 marks if the answer is correct and no workings are shown. If the learner provides 2,648, it's 5 marks straight away. If workings are shown correctly but the final answer is wrong, award a maximum of 3 marks. And what does that mean? It means the learner is likely to come to only to that 10,648. If the learner has, has ended on that answer of 10,648, the learner will get 3 marks. And the learner did not go through to the latter or to the last part of the question, which was about the interest. Now, if the answer is incorrect, award a maximum of 1 mark for the understanding of the concept and the method. And then the maximum marks there is 5 marks. Straightforward. It's not for the first time. A question like this is asked on calculation. By now you should be knowing, and continue to prepare your learners and train them on how they should answer this question. And it is important because learners don't do well in calculations, and I don't know why. And you must begin to prepare your learners towards end of the year examination. Colleagues, see how they are going to prepare to perform on this question when you mark. And then the last question was 2.6, which said evaluate the impact of government or RSA retail saving bonds as a form of investment. The impact, and with impact, we've got positives or advantages and disadvantages. Straightforward kind of a question. Positives or advantages, the retail saving bonds, guaranteed returns. There are guaranteed returns as the interest rate is fixed for the whole investment period. You see it's split mark in the end is 2 marks. And the learner should be writing in full sentences to benefit the full 2 marks. Interest rates are market related, 1 mark, and attract more investors, another mark. Interest can be received 1 mark, twice a year, another mark. Investments may be easily accessible, 1 mark, as cash may be withdrawn after the first 12 months. You can go through the responses, but these are the advantages of retail saving bonds as a form of investment. And then you come to the disadvantages. Retail bonds cannot be ceded to banks, 1 mark, as securities for obtaining loans, another mark. This is a disadvantage or the negative part of retail saving bonds. A minimum of 1,000 must be invested, 1 mark, which may be difficult for some small investors to accumulate, another mark. Retail bonds are not freely transferable, 1 mark, amongst investors, another mark. You go through that and you get a maximum of 6. And remember, the questions at the impact. So some candidates or learners may provide only positives or advantages, award to a maximum of 6 marks. Others may provide only disadvantages or negatives, still award a maximum of 6 marks. Others may combine the two, give you both, award a maximum of 6 marks there. And there is the breakdown of that question, a maximum of 40 marks. That brings us to the end of question 1, and we are going to take a short break, and we continue with memo discussion to wrap up immediately hereafter. Thank you. All right, welcome back from that short break, and we are continuing with the discussion of the marking guideline for the rest of the question, and we are going to move a bit faster now. Let's look at question 3, business roles now. 3.1, name 3 stages of team development, a straight kind of forward question. 3 stages of team development, 3 marks. And when you look at the responses, straightforward there, forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, you'll even find all of these in your 2021 examination guideline, and you mark to a maximum of 3 marks there. 3.2, outline the roles of health and safety representatives in protecting the workplace environment, 6 marks. Outline, the key verb there, outline, 2 ticks at the end. Roles of the health and safety representatives. This is also another question that as a teacher you must look at, because when we reflect back, last year's grade 12 learners, they did not do well when it comes to this question, because they tend not to provide the relevant responses. Just look at that question also. Let's look at the responses. Roles of the health and safety representatives. What is actually their role? Is to ensure that protective clothing is provided and available at workers, is 2 marks. They identify potential dangers in the workplace, 2 marks. They initiate or promote or maintain or review measures to ensure that the health and safety of workers. They check or they monitor the effectiveness of health and safety measures with management. You can see clearly that when you look at that point, it is clear that they work hand in hand with what? With the management of the business. So it is very, very important when learners provide responses that they know the clear roles there. This is not what the business has to do, but it's what the health and safety representatives, because they come from the workers. They are part of the workers. They represent the workers, and they work with the management or with the business. So you must just draw a clear line there when you try to deal with this content, so that learners, they know what they should provide, and they do not end up forfeiting marks unnecessarily. They ensure that all equipment that is necessary to perform work is provided and maintained regularly. They promote safety training so that employees may avoid potential dangers or act proactively. They ensure that dangerous equipment is used under supervision of trained and qualified workers. They ensure that workers' health and safety is not endangered by hazards resulting from production, processing, storage, transportation, or material equipment. They ensure that employers comply with COIDA, because they are not employers. It's very, very important to draw that line. They are representatives. They look at health and safety because they are representatives. They are not the employers. So they also check on whether the employer is complying with COIDA. You can go through the responses and you mark to a maximum of 6 there. Let's go back to the question. Look at this 3.3. Very interesting also. Things been asked differently this time. Many traders, MT. Many traders is located in an area where many people are struggling to find work due to a lack of skills. The majority are not able to satisfy their basic needs, and therefore they receive food parcels from non-governmental organizations. That is a scenario. 3.3.1. Identify 2 socio-economic issues. You see, this question has been asked differently, but it's all about application. Identify 2 socio-economic issues that pose a challenge to MT. Motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. There is a guide again in the form of a table. Use the table below as a guide for socio-economic issues and the motivation. And then look at 3.3.2. The follow-on question. Explain how the management of MT could deal with HIV as a socio-economic issue. Let's go to the responses. 3.3.1, socioeconomic issues. The first one identified there is unemployment. What is the motivation? Many traders is located in an area where many people are struggling to find work due to lack of skills. That's unemployment. It's 2 marks for unemployment and 1 mark for the motivation. And then the second socioeconomic issue there is poverty. What is the motivation? The majority are not able to satisfy their basic needs and therefore receive food parcels from non-governmental organization. The mark for that. So you've got submax of 4 and submax of 2. 4 under socioeconomic issues, 2 under motivations. Note, mark the first 2 only. Award marks for socioeconomic issues even if the codes were incomplete. And then do not award marks for the motivation if the socioeconomic issues were incorrectly identified. If the socioeconomic issue is wrong, there is no way the motivation can be right. Please take those notes into account. And then there was this question on HIV and AIDS. How management of MT could deal with HIV and AIDS as a socio-economic issue. Now you can see that HIV and AIDS is a socio-economic issue, but it was not included in the scenario. MT or businesses should offer counseling programs, train counselors to provide if infected or affected persons or employees. 2 marks for that. Develop counseling programs, 1 mark. For infected or affected persons or employees, another mark. Conduct workshops, 1 mark. On HIV/AIDS program or campaigns, another mark. Roll out antiretroviral treatment, 1 mark. For the infected employees, another mark. So, straightforward, this is a way to deal with HIV and AIDS as a socio-economic issue. You go through the responses, you mark to a maximum of 4. And then there was this question, discuss the causes of conflict in the workplace, 6 marks. The causes of conflict in the workplace, 6 marks. Let's look at the responses. Causes, lack of proper communication, 1 mark, between management and workers, another mark. Ignoring rules or procedures may result, 1 mark, in disagreements and conflict, another. All these are the causes of conflict at workplace. Management and or workers may have different, 1 mark, personalities or backgrounds, the other mark. Different values or levels of knowledge or skills or experience, 1 mark, of managers or workers, another mark. Little or no cooperation, 1 mark, between internal or external parties or stakeholders, another mark. Lack of recognition for good work, 1 mark. Manager may, e.g., may not show appreciation for extra hours worked to meet deadlines, another mark. Lack of employee development, 1 mark, may increase frustration levels as workers may repeat errors due to a lack of knowledge and skills, another mark. So you mark, you go through that, and you can see it's in full sentences. More than enough responses have been provided there. You mark to a maximum of 6 marks. Question 3.5, another scenario there. Sebastian auditors. Sebastian auditors employ workers from diverse backgrounds. A translator was appointed to ensure that all employees understand what is discussed during meetings. 3.5.1, identify the diversity issue that SA, which is Sebastian auditors, has addressed. Motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario. So you can see this question paper was full of scenarios, and learners expected to identify and also motivate. So you can see it was full of application, and this is what learners should now be familiar with. And they can only be familiar with that if, as a teacher, you use this frequently in your informal assessment. And then discuss the benefits of diversity in the workplace, 6 marks. Let's look at the responses quickly. The diversity issue identified from the scenario is language. What is the motivation thereof? A translator was appointed to ensure that all employees understand what is being discussed during the meeting. So it's 2 marks for language and 1 mark for the motivation. Note, award marks for the diversity issue even if the code was incomplete or incorrect. Do not award marks for the motivation if the diversity issue was incorrectly identified. You can see this note, it also links with or similar to the questions we've gone through before. And then the benefits of diversity at workplace. Workforce diversity improves the ability of the business, 1 mark, to solve problems or innovative or cultivate diverse markets, another mark. Employees value each other's diversity, 1 mark, and learn to connect or communicate across lines of difference, another mark. Diversity in the workplace improves, 1 mark, morale or motivation, another mark. Employees demonstrate greater loyalty to the business, 1 mark, because they feel respected or accepted or understood, another mark. The benefits of diversity in the workplace, a very common kind of a question also that learners really shouldn't struggle with because it's been there year in, year out. The benefits or the advantages of diversity in the workplace. And learners tend to, state a fact and repeat the same fact over and over again. Just be careful of repetition in this question. When you mark, you go through the responses and you mark to a maximum of 6. And then the last question on this question was saying, analyze the impact of brainstorming as a problem-solving technique. The impact of brainstorming. Let's look at the responses. Because of the word impact, you'll have positives or advantages and negatives or disadvantages. And the focus there is on brainstorming as a problem-solving technique. The first point there, team members or people get ideas from others, it's 1 mark, and build on them, another mark. Brainstorming, it stimulates creative thinking in the workplace. Better solutions are developed through collective contributions. Combinations of ideas or improvements can be chosen, 1 mark, after all the ideas have been written down. Employees are motivated, 1 mark, as they are allowed to contribute to the problem solving. Negatives. Some team members may dominate, 1 mark, the discussion, another mark, because it's brainstorming. Brainstorming may result in conflict, 1 mark, due to differences in opinion, another mark. Fear of criticism may prevent, 1 mark, full participation in brainstorming sessions. So you mark up to a maximum of 6, and because the question was simply saying discuss and analyze the impact. Some candidates or learners may focus only on advantages, others may concentrate only on disadvantages, others may combine the two. So whether they combine advantages and disadvantages or they focus only on advantages or disadvantages, they must still be awarded full marks. But be careful when you mark this question. Be careful if learners provide responses of simply problem solving in general, not necessarily with specific reference to brainstorming. Just be careful. The responses should be with specific reference to brainstorming. It can be impact on problem solving in general. Just be careful. Let's go to the next question. Question 4, quickly. Miscellaneous. With miscellaneous, it's a combination of the 2 broad topics, business ventures and also business roles. 4.1, give 2 examples of non-verbal presentations, 2 marks. Straightforward kind of a question, and it's an appetizer. Number 2, outline the characteristics of a private company. I think this was also a very straight kind of a question. Straightforward, maximum of 6 marks. Let's go to 4.3. Read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Superior construction. SC. Superior construction employs a large number of workers at their construction sites. CS contributes to the Unemployment Insurance Fund and the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Fund. They also take out life insurance for key personnel. This question has also been asked differently. Quote 2 types of compulsory insurance in the scenario above, 2 marks. This was straightforward because it is there. You can see that in the scenario. And then explain one type of compulsory insurance quoted in question 4.3.1. Let's look at the responses. Examples of non-verbal presentations, there you go. 4.2, characteristics of private companies, straightforward. And then 4.3, here we are. Types of compulsory insurance. It's Unemployment Insurance Fund, it's 1 mark. And then Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Fund, another mark. Excuse me. Note, mark the first 2 only, because the question stated clearly that you must quote 2 types of compulsory insurance. And then only award marks for responses that were quoted from the scenario. And then the following question was about the candidates explaining one of the types of compulsory insurance in the scenario. The first one there was Unemployment Insurance Fund. They simply have got to do what? To explain. For example, Unemployment Insurance Fund, the UIF provides benefits to workers who have been working, 1 mark, and become unemployed for various reasons, another mark. Businesses contribute 1% of basic wages towards UIF, 1 mark, therefore reducing the expense of providing UIF benefits themselves, another mark. Employee contributes 1%, 1 mark, of their basic wage to UIF, another mark. You go through the responses in as far as the explanation of Unemployment Insurance Fund. You mark to a maximum of 4, and then some learners may also choose to explain Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Fund. The fund covers occupational diseases, 1 mark, and workplace injuries, another mark. Compensates employees for injuries and diseases, 1 mark. Injured at work, another mark. Compensation paid is determined, 1 mark, by the degree of disablement, another mark. The contribution payable is reviewed every few years, 1 mark, according to the risk associated with the type of work, another mark. There's more than enough responses there. You go through that and you mark to a maximum of 4. Note, mark the first response only because the question said explain one type of compulsory insurance quoted in question 4.3.1. And then do not award marks for the road accident fund because there is a temptation that learners may provide responses in as far as road accident fund. That was not asked. It's UIF and compensation for occupational injuries and diseases fund. And then let's go back to the question there, 4.4. Advise presenters on how they could handle feedback in a non-aggressive and professional manner after presentation, 6 marks. Let's look at the responses. A very kind of common question also, the handling of feedback. Presenters should stand through the feedback session, 2 marks. Be polite, confident, cautious when responding to questions, 2 marks. Ensure that each question or comment is clearly understood before responding or rephrase question if uncertain, 2 marks. They should first listen and then respond, 2 marks. Provide feedback as soon as possible after the question was asked or after the session, 2 marks. Be direct, honest, sincere when responding to questions, 2 marks. Keep answers short and to the point, 2 marks. Apologize or acknowledge the errors or mistakes if pointed out by the audience, 2 marks. Always address the question and not the person, 2 marks. More than enough responses also given in the marking guideline, and you mark to a maximum of 6 marks. Question 4.5. Outline the correct procedure to deal with grievance in the workplace, 6 marks. The correct procedure. Let's look at the responses. An aggrieved employee must verbally report the incident or grievance to his or her supervisor or manager, 2 marks. Supervisor or manager needs to resolve the issue within 3 to 5 working hours, 5 working days, 2 marks. Should the employee and supervisor not be able to resolve the grievance, the employee may take it to the next level of management, 2 marks. The employee may move to a more formal process where the grievance must be lodged in writing, completes a business grievance form, 2 marks. He or she must receive a written reply in response to the written grievance, 2 marks. So you can see it's the correct procedure to deal with grievances at the workplace. You go through that to a maximum of 6, and note the procedure may be in any order. 4.6, read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Mahomet Advertisers, MA. Mahomet Advertisers struggled to design a new advertising campaign to attract more clients. MA decided to train their employees on how to use innovative techniques. The employees were also requested to put any new ideas in the suggestion box. 4.6.2, quote 2 ways in which MA created an environment that promoted creative thinking in the scenario above, 2 marks. So, being asked differently this question this time around, but it's also about application. And then 4.6.2, explain the advantages of creative thinking in the workplace, a common question also, 6 marks. And then the last question there, evaluate the impact of corporate social responsibility on communities. Let's go back to the scenario 4.6, look at the responses there. Ways in which an environment that promotes creative thinking was created from the scenario. 1, MA decided to train the employees on how to use innovative techniques, 1 mark. The second one, the employees were also requested to put their new ideas in suggestion box, another mark. Mark the first 2 only. Only award marks for responses that were quoted from the scenario is 2 marks. Advantages of creative thinking. The question that I said is very common. Better, unique, or unconventional ideas or solutions, 1 mark, are generated, another mark. Creative thinking may give business a competitive advantage, 1 mark, if unusual or unique solutions, ideas, or strategies are implemented, another mark. Management or employees may keep up with fast-changing technology, 1 mark, which might lead to increased market share, another mark. Complex business problems, 1 mark, may be solved, another mark. Straightforward. Productivity increases as management or employees may quickly generate multiple ideas, 1 mark, which utilizes time and money more effectively, another mark. So you go through the responses and you mark to a maximum of 6. And the last question on this section, which was about the impact of CSR on communities. It's important. When you mark this question, be vigilant, because some learners may also provide the impact of CSR on the business. So here the focus is on communities. And because it's the word impact, and when you go back to the question paper, you'll realize that the word impact has been used many a times. And by now your learners should now be knowing what impact is and what is expected of them if a question says give the impact depending on what has been asked. And impact, we are expecting positives and negatives or advantages and disadvantages. Let's look at few. For example, socioeconomic issues are attended by businesses, 1 mark, which will improve the welfare of the community. So you see, it links with what has been asked, the benefit to the community. Training opportunities in the community increase the possibility, 1 mark, of appointments of members of the community is another mark. This, you must read the responses carefully, because if you are not careful, you end up awarding marks for the impact on business rather than on the community. So the responses should be linked to the impact on communities. Implementing developmental programs in the community, 1 mark, improves the entrepreneurial skills of communities, another mark. Provision of bursaries encourage communities, 1 mark, to improve their skills, another mark. The standard of living of the community, 1 mark, is uplifted, or the quality of life of communities, 1 mark, is improved, another mark. Let's look at some of the negatives. Businesses are not always equipped, 1 mark, to address social problems, another mark. So you may think that this is a disadvantage to business. No, this is also a disadvantage to what? To the communities, because it has got to do with how problems are addressed. Because businesses are not equipped to address the social problems you find in the communities, it's a disadvantage to the communities. Communities tend to be dependent on CSR programs, 1 mark, and struggle to take their own initiative, another mark. Distribution of scarce resources to selected beneficiaries in the community, 1 mark, may cause problems for such as discrimination, another mark. So all these, they link to the disadvantages of CSR to the communities. Mark carefully, and you mark to a maximum of 6 there. Some candidates or some learners may provide a combination of advantages and disadvantages. Others may focus only on advantages or only on disadvantages, but mark appropriately and accordingly. And it brings us to the end of this section, section B. Maximum of that question is 40. There is the breakdown of that question. I want us now to go straight to the essay, section C. Section C. Now let's look at section C. Question 5. We've already gone through question 5. You remember when I was trying to explain some of the notes earlier on, but let's go through it quickly. Question 5 is based on management and leadership, business ventures. Successful leaders know that a positive attitude enables them to achieve business goals. The situational leadership theory guides businesses on managing people. Some leaders believe in the effectiveness of charismatic and transactional leadership styles, while others prefer the autocratic leadership style. Write an essay on leadership in which you address the following aspects. Outline the role of personal attitude in successful leadership. Explain the situational leadership theory. Discuss the impact of the following leadership styles on businesses, charismatic and transactional. And lastly, suggest situations in which autocratic leadership style could be applied in the workplace, 40 marks. Let's look at the marking guideline. You mark the first question only because learners had to choose two from the, in fact, had to choose one from the two provided. Introduction. Now look at the introduction. The personal attitude of managers and leaders play an important role in promoting a good team spirit in the workplace. You see, this introductory statement, it links with what? With the first bullet in the question. The first bullet was about outlining the personal attitude in successful leadership style. So, advise your learners to always come up with the introduction that is in line with the bullets or the instructions That would make them to be relevant to what is being asked. Bullet number 2, the situational leadership theory enables leaders or managers to address or manage certain situations. This one also, it links with what? The second bullet of that question. The charismatic leadership style may influence employees to change their attitude towards work. It also links with the third bullet. And then the transactional leadership style provides guidelines to employees on how tasks should be executed. It links with also that same bullet. And the last one, the autocratic leadership style may assist leaders in ensuring that all employees perform their task productively. This one, it links with what? The last bullet of that question, where learners were expected to suggest situations in which autocratic leadership style could be applied in the workplace. Then, from there, learners can also come up with any relevant introduction related to the role of personal attitude in leadership or successful leadership, situational leadership theory, or the impact of charismatic or transactional leadership style, or even application of the autocratic leadership style, and maximum of 2 marks. It's 1 mark per introductory statement. And then the first part of the question there, role of personal attitude. Outline the role of personal attitude there. Positive attitude releases leadership potential, 2 marks. A leader's good or bad attitude can influence the success or failure of a business, 2 marks. Leaders must know their strengths and weaknesses to apply their leadership styles effectively, 2 marks. Great leaders understand that the right attitude will set the right atmosphere, 2 marks. So you go through the responses and you mark to a maximum of 12. This is also a common question. The question that has been there, you go through previous question papers, you'll come across this question, and learners also don't do well. When you give feedback, when you go through this question with your learners, please make sure that you do justice and you sensitize them. It's a question that is, it's likely to be there in the end of year question paper. So they must also look at that question very, very careful. Maximum of 12 marks there. And then you go to the next bullet there, which was about the situational leadership theory. Explain this situational leadership theory. Because the word said explain, the marking thereof is like that. Different leadership characteristics, 1 mark, are needed for different situations, another mark, because you are explaining the situational leadership theory. The task or situation dictates the leadership style that should be applied, 1 mark. So leaders are adaptable or flexible or self-assured, another mark. Effective application of this theory may enable leaders to accomplish their goals. Relationship between leaders and employees are based on mutual trust, respect, loyalty, integrity, or honesty. Leaders have the ability to analyze the situation or get most suitable people in the right positions to complete the task successfully. Leaders analyze group members' objectives, time constraints to adopt a suitable, relevant leadership style. You go through that and you mark to a maximum of 8. And then the next question was on the impact. There comes impact again of charismatic and transactional leadership styles on businesses. Let's start with charismatic leadership style. You have positives and negatives. And the maximum there, or the submax of that, is 8. Let's look at some of the positives of charismatic leadership style. Expects at selling the business vision and achieving excellent results. 2 marks. It's 1 mark and another mark. Employees are motivated, 1 mark, as the leader is energetic or inspiring, another mark. This leadership style, it inspires loyalty, 1 mark, and hard work among employees, another mark. These are some of the positives. And then what are some of the negatives or disadvantages? Leader believes more in himself or herself 1 mark than the team another mark. It's a disadvantage. That is an impact. You can see that. Projects can collapse 1 mark if the leader leaves the team another mark. Leaders are intolerant of challenges or changes 1 mark and regard themselves as irreplaceable another mark. You see, this is the impact of this charismatic leadership style, and you mark to a submax of 8. Let's go to the impact of transactional leadership style. What are some of the positives? This transactional leadership style, it encourages employees to work hard 1 mark because they will receive rewards another mark. It improves employees' productivity 1 mark and morale another mark. Business goals or objectives can be achieved 1 mark as employees are motivated another mark. These are some of the advantages. Let's look at some of the disadvantages. Employees may become bored or lose creativity 1 mark as they have to follow rules and procedures another mark. A transactional leader will have to monitor the work performance of employees 1 mark to ensure that expectations are met another mark. Managing or controlling employees 1 mark may be time consuming another mark. Some employees may be demoralized or unmotivated 1 mark if they fail to reach or meet targets despite having worked very hard another mark. These are some of the disadvantages. A submax of 8, you add 8 plus 8, it should give you a maximum of 16 on this. And then you go to the last part of this question, which was about situations in which autocratic leadership style could be applied. And the verb that was used there was suggest. That's why we have 2 marks at the end of each at the end of each response given in the marking guideline. For example, this leadership style can be applied when there is a crisis in the workplace, e.g. the case of unforeseen challenges or accidents, 2 marks. When there are emergencies where there is a shortage of time, 2 marks. When employees are motivated and the leader has already earned the trust of their followers, another mark. Where dealing with employees who are not cooperative, 2 marks. Where employees are new or not fully trained, 2 marks. So it gives you the picture of when should this be a autocratic leadership style be applied. It is when you are faced with such situations. You mark to a maximum of 10 there, and then you go to the conclusion. Look at the concluding statements. A leader who has a positive attitude is able to see beyond the current situation and plan ahead, 2 marks. Leaders must be well conversant with situational leadership theory in order to lead people effectively in the workplace, 2 marks. Leaders who know the application of various leadership styles may be able to select the best leadership style that is relevant to the situation. So you can see even here, concluding statements, they link with the bullets, meaning that they link with the instructions. It's 2 marks, a maximum of 2 marks for the conclusion. And then let's look at the breakdown of question 5. Introduction is 2 marks. Role of personal attitude, 12. Situational leadership theory, 8. Impact, 16. Situations, 10. When you add all of those marks, including the conclusion, they give you a total of 50, but you reduce that to a maximum of 32. Then you add the marks for the inside, which is your lasso. Now let's go to the last question in this question paper. Question 6 on business roles, ethics and professionalism. And I'm sure some people, they never thought that you can have an essay from this content. There it is. It's possible. The King Code principles provide guidelines on the application of ethical and professional business practices. Businesses need to identify unprofessional behavior that poses challenges in their operations and develop strategies to deal with them. That is the preamble. Let's come to the question. Write an essay on ethical and professional behavior in which you address the following aspects. The first bullet outlines the differences between ethical and professional behavior. The second bullet explains how businesses could apply the King Code principles of accountability and transparency for good corporate governance. Thirdly, describe how the following unprofessional business practices pose a challenge to the business: abuse of work time and unauthorized use of workplace funds and resources. And lastly, recommend ways in which business could deal with each of the above unprofessional business practice. 40 marks. Let's go to the marking guideline. The introduction. The first thing is the introduction. Business develop a code of ethics as a guide to make ethical decisions. 1 mark. Many businesses have a code of conduct that outlines the expected ethical and professional behavior in their work, for their employees. Another mark. The King Code principles serve as a framework on how businesses can conduct themselves ethically and professionally. Another mark. Employees should be informed of the negative impact of unprofessional behavior on the business operations. Another mark. So you can see, even the introduction in this essay, all the introductory statements, they link with what? With the bullets, with the instructions. They link with the questions. When you advise your learners to come up with introductions, always advise them to link or to come up with introductory statements that link with the instructions. That would make their discussions in the essays to be relevant to the questions. You mark up to a maximum of 12 there, in fact of two marks there, and any other relevant introduction related to ethical and professional behavior or application of King Code principles or challenges of unprofessional business practices or dealing with unprofessional business practices. The second, the first bullet there was the difference between ethical and professional behavior. Look at that. You've got ethical behavior this side and unprofessional behavior the other side. The difference between the two. First bullet on the ethical side, it refers to the principles of right and wrong or acceptable in society. Is 2 marks. Look at the responses on the right-hand side of unprofessional behavior. It refers to what is right or wrong, acceptable in a business. So it clearly gives the difference because with ethics, you've got to do with the society, but with professionalism, it has got to be in relation to the profession. It conforms to a set of values that are morally acceptable when it comes to ethics, but when it comes to professionalism, it has got to do with a set of standards of expected behavior. It forms part of code of conduct to guide employees to act ethically. Applying a code of conduct of a profession or a business. So that, it gives a clear difference or distinction between the two. You go through the responses and you have got submax of 4 for ethical behavior and submax of 4 for unprofessional, for professional behavior. Ethical behavior 4, professional behavior 4. It means maximum is 8. Look at the note. Answers, or the answer does not have to be in a tabular format. Learners can present their responses whichever way. Number 2, the differences do not have to link but must be clear. Because they must come up with the differences. They don't have to link. What they say this side should not necessarily link with what they say the other side, but there should be that clear difference. What makes this, what makes ethical behavior different from professional behavior? That's what that's the core of the question. And then they award a maximum of 4 marks if the differences are not clear. Mark either ethical behavior or professional behavior only. What does this note mean? It means if the learner, the ethical behavior responses are the ones that are clear, and professional behavior, they are not clear, then you will only award marks on the ethical behavior side, and the learner will forfeit marks on the professional behavior side, and so on. So just take note of that note and mark accordingly. Application now. Application of King Code principle. The first one was accountability. Submax of 6 there. For example, some of the responses expected from the candidates, amongst others, there must be a regular communication, 1 mark, between management and stakeholders like shareholders, another mark. That has got to do with accountability. Company should appoint internal and external auditors, 1 mark, to audit financial statements, another mark. That's part of accountability. The board should ensure that the company's ethics, 1 mark, are effectively implemented, another mark. The business should be accountable or responsible for their decisions or actions. You've got 2 marks there. So that has got to do with what? With accountability. The business should present accurate annual reports, 1 mark, to shareholders at the annual general meeting. When you go and present, you are sort of accounting to whoever you've got to account to. So this also forms part of way in which this can be applied, this King Code principle. And submax there is 6. You go to transparency. Regular audits should be done, 1 mark, to determine the effectiveness of the business, another mark. This has got to do with what? Transparency now. So learners should actually know what transparency is all about, what accountability is all about. Then they will be able to come up with clear and relevant responses. Auditing and other reports, 1 mark, must be accurate or available to shareholders or employees, another mark. Business deals should be conducted openly, 1 mark, so that there is no hint or sign of dishonesty or corruption, another mark. That has got to do with transparency. You go through the responses, submax of 6, and then the 2 added together, they will give you a maximum of 12 marks. We go to the next part of the question, which had to do with the challenges posed by unprofessional business practice. You see, this question, the way it has been asked, it's very different. But this is also there in the examination guideline. Just look at the question and begin to familiarize your learners with how this question was asked and what the responses were expected thereof. For example, this unprofessional business practice of abusing work time, how does this pose a challenge? For example, abuse of work time could result in losing customers, 1 mark, and not meeting deadlines, another mark. So be careful. Responses here should not be in the form of learners explaining what abuse of work time is. They should rather explain how this poses a challenge, not what is abuse of work time. When you mark this, be careful when it comes to that. Abuse of work time, it may lead in employees often abusing work time. This abuse of work time, wasting time, costs the business money and affects productivity, another mark. Abuse of work time decreases productivity and loss of profits, another mark. So you can see the responses that are in such a way that they explain how this unprofessional behavior poses a challenge to the business. Submax of 6, let's look at unauthorized use of workplace funds. Fraud increases the cost of doing business, 1 mark, as prices are increased to absorb the losses, another mark. Unauthorized use of workplace funds, it affects competition, 1 mark, and discourages investors, another mark. Businesses may have a negative image, 1 mark, as it would appear that proper auditing it is not conducted, another mark. So you can see the responses also here. They explain how this poses a challenge to the business. Abuse and unauthorized use of workplace funds and resources. You go through the responses and you can see all the responses are negative because this has got negative impact. It affects the business negatively. Because the question is, how does this pose a challenge? A challenge will definitely be negative. Submax of 6, and look there, you must be careful there. It's submax of 6 for abuse of work time and submax of 6 for unauthorized use of workplace funds and resources. However, the maximum is not 12. The maximum is what? Is 10. Be careful when you mark that. And then we go to the last part of this question. Ways in which business could deal with unprofessional business practice. Remember the question said, recommend ways to deal with each of them that were discussed above. Let's look at workplace and abuse of work time. How the business can deal with this unprofessional business practice. The first point there in the marking guideline, speak directly to those employees who abuse work time. This is a way to deal with it. 2 marks. Code of ethics or conduct should contain clear rules about abuse of work time. 2 marks. Conduct training on the contents of the code of conduct or ethics. 2 marks. Code of conduct or ethics should be assigned by employees, by all employees, so that they are aware of its contents. 2 marks. Monitor employees to ensure that tasks are completed on time. So look at the responses. They are in a way corrective because it's a way to deal with this unprofessional business practice. You must talk to your learners and caution them to come up with responses that are sort of punitive or that are sort of negative. For example, fire the employee. That kind of a way to deal with this unprofessional business practice is not corrective and is not helping the situation. So encourage them to come up with responses that are corrective, trying to correct the situation. You mark there to a submax of 8, and then ways to deal with unauthorized use of workplace funds and resources. Some of the responses: conduct regular audits to prevent unauthorized use of funds at an early stage, 2 marks. Identify risk areas or vulnerable areas, 2 marks. Limit the number of employees having access to business funds or assets, another mark. Educate employees about the impact of fraud, 2 marks. Clear policies should be in place so that employees are aware of what is considered to be fraud, 2 marks. You can see also here that the responses are corrective. You go through that to a maximum of a submax of 8, and then it says, do not award marks for dealing with unprofessional business practice that are not stated in the question. So it's important to focus on the question there when you look at that note, and the maximum marks there, it's 16 for that question. Then you go to the conclusion. Conclusion, it's a concluding statement. One of the concluding statements there, a business code of ethics or conduct should improve relationships and eliminate unethical and unprofessional business practice. The King Code principles can be applied to all entities, private or public sectors, 2 marks. Employees who are guilty of unprofessional behavior should be dealt with to avoid others modeling the same behavior, 2 marks. You go through that, you can see that even the concluding statements, they link with the questions. Like I said with the introduction, make sure that when you advise your learners, you say to them their concluding statements should be linked with the bullets or the instructions or the question themselves, and you mark to a maximum of 2. And let's look at the breakdown of that question. Introduction is 2. Difference between ethical and professional behavior is 8. Application of principles is 12. Professional business practice posing challenge, maximum is 10. And then recommendation there, it's 16, conclusion is 2, and the maximum should be 50, and that should be reduced to a maximum of 32. Then you add your max for inside, which is your lasso, maximum of 8, and when you add 32, you add 8 to 32, you get your maximum of 40. And that brings me to the end of our marking guideline for paper 2. I hope this has clarified quite a number of issues that you might have been having in as far as the marking of this is concerned. And I want to take this moment to thank you and also wish you luck and hope that you have done well in your paper 2, and also say to teachers now, remember this was a trial examination. This is examination before the final one, and I'm sure after marking both paper 1 and paper 2, you should now be having, after marking, a clearer picture of where you stand. This should be some sort of a barometer where you stand now. Analyze the result carefully, mark properly, and then take it from there and conduct your item and error analysis, and then plan thoroughly on how you are going to finally prepare your learners in as far as the final examination is concerned. I want to take this moment to thank you also, and also to wish you luck towards the end of the year. With those few words, goodbye and good luck.